Eloise in Oxonia, a creative podcast by the Oxford Writers' House. Follow English student Eloise Weaver as she moves through the city of Oxford, encountering stories, past and present. Eloise's adventures are fantasy, but the authors, people and ideas she encounters are as real as you and I.
You can kill anything except an idea. Ideas are immortal. That's why I wanted to read here. Oxonia, where the legends grew ideas. Shelley, Carroll, Wilde. It's my first term. More than anything, I want to make a good impression. Have I remembered everything? Reading list, notebooks, toothbrush, hairbrush. My mind is rushing like a waterfall, wild, aimless. Long live the weeds in the wilderness yet. What is that line? I flick through my books until I find it and read it to calm my nerves and steady my excitement.
Inversnade by Gerard Manley Hopkins. This darksome burn, horseback brown, his roll rock high road roaring down. In coop and in comb, the fleece of his foam flutes, and low to the lake falls home. A wind-puff bonnet of fawn froth turns and twindles over the broth of a pool so pitch black, fell frowning, it rounds and rounds despair to drowning. Decked with dew, dappled with dew, are the groins of the braes that the brook treads through. Wiry heath packs, flitches of fern, and the bead bonnet ash that sits over the burn. What would the world be, once bereft of wet and of wildness? Let them be left, oh let them be left, wildness and wet. Long live the weeds and the wilderness yet.
Long live the weeds in the wilderness yet. I need to focus. This is a serious place full of serious people. I bought my black Fusc today, which is a weird name for a weird outfit. Fusc is worn for dinners and exams, and who knows what else. I guess I'll get used to it. This morning, the mirror reflected back to me a nervous face in a penguin suit. The Fusc I have is called a commoner's gown and is worn by undergraduates. Next week is North Week of Michaelmas term. Michaelmas sounds like it means more Michaels in Spanish, but it's the Oxonian expression for the autumn academic term. I am reading English literature. They don't say study in Oxonia, they say read. Study is for specimens like cockroaches or bacterial stains. But read sounds more human. Study sounds sterile and clinical. The coroner studied the corpse for signs of bludgeoning. The geologist studied the sedimentary rock from the Jurassic era. Reading is an unfinished business. There will never be an end to reading. The poet read the sky for signs of nostalgia. The artist read the face of her lover for hints of despair. I took Southwestern rail services, speeding over the grey landscape, passing towns with names like Appleford, Wallingford, Shillingford, Long Wittenham, Little Wittenham, and Wootton. Outside the station, large black taxis hum like humongous beetles waiting for passengers. When I leave the taxi, I find I'm walking the ancient cobbled streets. The buildings are constructed of chipped stone slabs, heavy and gothic. There are dreamy, lost pedestrians in dusty duffel coats, trudging up and down the narrow alleyways. Late summer light dances over the window panes. Everything is licked with a deep rose gold. I walk up Broad Street. I reach Blackwell's Bookshop and enter. Steps of heavy stone mark its entrance. The forces of 150 years of footfall have carved hollows into the centre of each step. I wonder about the history of these much-walked paths and ask about their past. The lady in the bookshop tells me there is a talk being held with the Bodley and Blackwell's fellow and suggests I ask her more about the shop. I slip in at the back and at the end walk over to speak to her.
When you look at the history of Oxford, in a way the Blackwell's history is so isomorphic, it so maps out the history of Oxford. Here's ordinary people who come here from nowhere and do well.
She tells me that she was able to find out more about the history of the shop from looking at its papers, saying that
They had these circulating libraries, and they would go round people's houses. Benjamin Harris Blackwell had a little handcart, and he would trundle around and knock on the door, and it would be the mum, wouldn't it, with the little kids. And for some very small sum of money, they could borrow books. And so he started like that. He managed to get a small shop in East Oxford, so going up just over Magdalen Bridge. He couldn't open a shop within Oxford because there was a rule that you had to be a freeman of the city. There's all these ancient rules where people were debarred. So it was really stacked against you if you were Mr. Nobody from nowhere. So he opened this little shop in 1846. And, of course, who came to that bookshop? It wasn't the working people who he'd sold books to via the circulating library. It was dons. It was then men, of course. They married. It became the sort of Oxford walk. On the way, they'd hang out round his little tiny bookshop. But what happened was that in 1851, the Public Libraries Act was passed. And the Public Library Act meant that there would be a free public library in every city and in every town. And they stemmed from that. They didn't all happen at once. But the Oxford one was on the cards, and it was where the old town hall is now. He was made librarian. Now, isn't that extraordinary? Look, Oxford is awash with people with PhDs and subsequent degrees, and there were masses and masses of qualified people hanging around Oxford who hadn't got jobs. So how come he got that job? I mean, it's extraordinary. So this is why I say the Blackwell story is about ordinary, very ordinary people doing extraordinary things. So he had 3 jobs, and it killed him. He died at 44, leaving a young family. And so they had to leave school. So his son, Benjamin Henry, who was very academic, was apprenticed to a little bookshop down in the Turl, and then he worked his way through the apprenticeship. And then he moved to another shop and he became a kind of manager. And all the time he was harvesting. One of his jobs would be to go to sales of work, that people would sell their books. And he'd go along to these sales and he'd bid for, he wouldn't be able to afford anything very much, but he amassed, and he was saving the whole time. He's looking after his mum, but his mum had done well as a dressmaker. She was a very good embroideress. And they took lodgers in, and they even had a kind of a maid by that stage, so they'd kind of gone up, been socially mobile. And he hung around with, with people of that lower middle class sort of background, and he sung in the Bach choir, and he did all that kind of stuff. But the whole time he's saving, because he wants to open his own little bookshop. And finally, with the help of another woman who was his benefactor, he found that little tiny shop in Broad Street. In 1878, he found the shop, but the deeds were signed on New Year's Day, 1879. The same time as he opened the bookshop, he started a publishing company. He wasn't, because bookshops and publishing were the same. But he was very, very pro ordinary people doing well. So when he started his little publishing outfit, he called it Writers Unknown to Fame. So he wanted to give people a chance. Some of them, of course, many of them had, in fact, became very famous, but not at the time. And, he was so generous. He would often pay for their stuff to be published. So his apprentices were of the same ilk. They were people who showed promise at school, who were good boys, who worked hard at school. The thing about Benjamin Henry was that he sent his apprentices to night school. So in a way, that Benjamin Harris Blackwell, who came from the East End of London in 1833, his dream came to fruition, if you like. So it's a magical story, and the story is really one that should help anybody who thinks, look, okay, I can do it. You can do it. It's about ordinary people knowing that they can educate themselves. It's about autodidacts. It's about people bettering, self-betterment, not in a kind of avaricious way, but in a personal way. And an interesting example of that is during the First World War, Benjamin Henry's son, Basil Blackwell, who is the one that people know the most about, Sir Basil Blackwell, who died in 1984. Him and his sister Dorothy ran a sort of a literary society in the bookshop so that people could come, and all sorts of people like Vera Brittain, Dorothy L. Sayers. They all came along and read at those sessions. And again, it was open access. There was all sorts of other people who were in the same cohort as Dorothy L. Sayers and Vera Brittain, who also were around. Julian Blackwell, who was the last of the Blackwells who worked in the bookshop, he had a whole load of the archives stuffed in his father's squash court. That sounds very posh, doesn't it? But, you know, they've gone up in the world a bit. And he dumped all these boxes on me. And I found this letter, and it said, "You, Sir Basil Blackwell, were my first publishers." Tolkien. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. So that's now preserved in the Blackwell archive. So there's all sorts of amazing stories, but the story that's really resonant and which is really relevant today is that ordinary people can do it. They can make it, like they can build an empire. There was a time when Blackwell's bookshop in Oxford was probably the most important bookshop almost in the world. People would come from New Zealand and they would order their books from Blackwell's. American universities would, and Indian universities and so on. So it was the kind of the big I am. And it was an amazing story that you start from somebody who came from a working class East End of London, was instrumental in building what became an empire, a book empire.
She suggests that I go and look at a poem by J.R.R. Tolkien, written in 1915 when he was 22 years old, only a few years older than me. He was in his third year of reading English, about to take his finals and leave to fight in the war. Most of his early work was rejected, but this poem, Goblin Feet, was published in a volume of Oxford poetry in 1915. I found it on a shelf. Listen.
The air is full of wings and of blundery beetle things that warn you with their whirring and their humming. Oh, I hear the tiny horns of enchanted leprechauns, and the padded feet of many gnomes are coming.
I feel a bit like that today. Everything hums. Nothing would surprise me. I pick up a volume of poetry, a map, and a cup of hot chocolate from the cafe. When I feel anxious, I like to read poetry. I sip. I sip again. I've heard so many rumours about Oxonia. Some say the city is haunted and that the library rests on a medieval graveyard. I open up a map of the city of dreaming spires. Where should I go tomorrow? Maybe a museum. I finished my hot chocolate. The light is fading and the Sheldonian Theatre across the street from Blackwell's is lit from within. There's a concert tonight. The street lamps flicker alive. I should be heading to college now, to set up my room and try to sleep. I feel lonely. I don't know anybody here. I've spent my life in a barnacle-encrusted seaside town drinking cheap lager and chatting with the same 5 friends. They're all in Nottingham now, doing useful degrees like engineering and accounting. Mum's been supportive of me reading English. Dad's going along with it. At least my big brother Oscar has made something of himself, so there's less pressure on me to be perfect. But I do feel the pressure. I feel it in my nerves and muscles. It keeps me awake at night and infiltrates my dreams. I dream of goblins hissing riddles in strange languages. It would be lovely to have somebody to confide in when the days grow dark. Would you come with me for my first days of university? I will squirrel you away in my autumn coat pocket. It will be our secret. I'm walking up the street as the air cools under lamplight. I find myself staring at the door of my college. It's as if somebody cut a secret entrance into the thick wooden wall just here. Only the heavy iron ring indicates the existence of a door. Grasping the ring, I turn it and push. The door is small and heavy, yet it hides a college inside that is vast and webbed with corridors, like a labyrinth. You need to duck down to enter through the door, like Alice in Wonderland. Immediately upon entering is the porter's lodge. My stomach is churning. The porter's lodge, yes, Oxonia still has porters and porters' lodges, is a room with a glass booth where the porter spends their days, sorting out mail and directing foot traffic. Along the walls of the lodge are pigeonhole mailboxes, rows of cubbies that look like they're meant for shoes. Here, nestled in a world of papers and to-do lists, I meet Edmund, the porter.
Hello there, can I help you?
Ed gives me a fob to this ancient world. It's a simple digital key to open up all the secrets of the college. He shows me my locker. He tells me I'll be living in staircase 17. I've never lived in a staircase before. Staircases are important here. They are portals to back rooms and hidden gardens. I am surprised by how big the building is, and I'm worried I won't be able to find my way. But Ed reassures me that
it's a very big campus, so there are rooms that people don't know, even after they've been here 2 years. Each room has about 3 names.
as we walk to my staircase, he jokingly warns me about the old buildings, telling stories about broken locks on the accommodation.
When I first started, I worked nights, and I got a call at about 2 o'clock in the morning from a student saying, my friend is trapped in the toilet. Okay, I thought, well, that's not too difficult. You go with a screwdriver and latch it. I went to this toilet, and the toilet door must have been 8 foot high, flush to the door jamb, to the door frame, and nowhere to unscrew it or unlock it. And I tried bunching it down and kicking it down, and it's very small in there, so I didn't want to hurt the young lady who was in there. But I could not get this door open. In the end, I had to call the fire brigade. And they came and they went there, and they had to get the pneumatic jaws to cut the door frame to get this girl out. She was in there about 2 hours. She was quite calm about it, which was good because, could be quite a scary thing. But yeah, we eventually got her out, and I've never been locked in anywhere yet. But, I have. When I first started here, I went for a wander round, and some of the more modern staircases built in the 80s have a back door going onto the river. So I thought, I'll go and have a look in there. So I went through the back door, looking at the river, walked down a little bit, went to get back in, and I had master keys with me, no keyhole. I was stuck there and I couldn't get in, and eventually, my colleague came looking for me. And I said, well, I didn't know. Oh, yeah, so you can't get out once you get in. Anyway, that's when I was locked in. We've dealt with that now.
I'm not sure if these stories make me feel better or worse, but it is nice to have met someone, and to know there is a friendly face about college who I can talk to if I get stuck. We passed the SCR, the senior common room.
I'm afraid you can't go in the SCR.
The porter explains.
Not for you.
The correct place for me is the junior common room. I can just make out a bright room beyond that dark door. I catch a glimpse of a glass drinks cabinet, plush carpet, oversized leather chairs, and a yawning bookshelf. I see an older woman through the cracked doorway. She looks up at me with a flash of acknowledgement. She has piercing green eyes. I feel a cold shiver run up my spine as she seems to look into my soul. Then the door slams shut. Who was she? Maybe one of the lecturers? And here's the porter, back to take me to my room, my new life. My future. Now I am alone in my room. The darkness is slowly swallowing me. Thank you for listening. Good night, my friend. Sweet dreams.
Episode 1 of Eloise in Oxonia was written by Dr. April Power, Charlie Webber-Bolton and Joy Chang, with editorial insights from Ursula White and Judith Bunting. The audio for this episode was edited by Ursula White and features original readings by Esme Rhodes and Judith Bunting. Cameron Power reads the work of J.R.R. Tolkien, and Alice Oswald, Oxford Professor of Poetry, reads the verse of Gerard Manley Hopkins. The episode also features interviews with Rita Ricketts, Bodleian's Blackwell Fellow, and Edmund Evans, the porter at St Catherine's College. Special thanks goes to the National Poetry Archive for their expert support.